How's it going so far? Okay, I see I'm looking in the Hoover chat. Let me check here. Like I had everything all planned out and looked all nice, and then we get to like 10 minutes and then I started having problems. Let's see.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, there we go. All right, just let me know now if you can still hear me. I'm gonna have to probably keep one screen muted with the Hoover chat. And then all right. All right, so I think we should be good now. So we'll go ahead. I will move this over here just in case there's any questions in the chat so I can see it. I apologize for that. Everybody, my name is Davin Jackson, and thank you for joining today's workshop, the Introduction to Ethical Hacking. If you haven't done so already, I'm going to put a link in the chat for the slides, or not the slides, for the Google folder that you can access if you want to work along. So you can go ahead and install some of the stuff while we're talking, and then when we actually get to the lab, we'll get to the configuration part of it. We only have 2 hours, so I'm going to try to speed up a little bit and catch up, but it's just today's class is going to be just a brief introduction, and we're going to do some hands-on pen testing. So before we get started, I do have a couple of disclaimers. So the first disclaimer is that this workshop is informational and for educational purposes only. The machines here that we're going to exploit are intentionally vulnerable and available for training purposes. Do not, and I repeat, do not do any hacking or penetration testings on machines without permission. The tools and techniques used for hacking are technically illegal. So especially if you do them without permission. And then the views and opinions expressed by me do not reflect the views of my employer, which I work for myself these days, so we're okay. And then the other disclaimer is this workshop is also for informational and educational purposes only. This workshop will not teach you everything you need to know to become a professional penetration tester. Please do not leave this workshop and immediately apply for penetration testing gigs. These jobs require a significant amount of training and education. I actually have to say that because in the workshop I've taught before, some people thought that that's all they needed to know, that it was really a simple, just kind of scan and go type thing. And that's not the case at all. And the other disclaimer is have fun and enjoy the workshop. So now that we got all of that stuff out the way, I'm going to upload the link right here in the chat. Just give me 1 second. Copy the link, and then in the chat here, I will put the link to this Google folder. So in there, there's a couple, there should be a link. There's a 7-zip file for the Kali Linux machine. There's also the 7-zip application if you want to download it so you can unzip the file. And then there's also the basic pen test OVA file. And then there's a couple documents that I have in there. And then I also have a copy of the slide deck in PDF form. So we're still good to go? Everybody good so far? All right. So so today's agenda, we're just going to kind of go through a breakdown of a quick introduction. Then we're going to go into what is ethical hacking. We're going to go into some of the operating systems and basics of Linux. And then we're going to go into the phases of a pen test. So we're going to cover the reconnaissance and enumeration phase, scanning and vulnerability analysis. Then we're going to move into exploitation, quickly move into post-exploitation and privilege escalation. And then we'll just kind of go over some stuff with the report writing and delivery. Then we'll kind of go into some next steps if you're interested in continuing on, some other resources, and then we're going to wrap up. So again, we're here till about 5 o'clock. So this class kind of moved pretty fast, but again, we should get through it. So the objectives is today, this is an interactive workshop. It's aimed to provide a foundational understanding and principles and techniques of ethical hacking. It's designed for anyone interested in learning how to identify weaknesses in computers and networks or applications and how to exploit them legally, of course. And then participants will learn about the importance of ethical hacking in the context of cybersecurity. So a brief introduction of who I am. So I am Davin Jackson. I am father first, husband, and an Air Force veteran. I'm also a pen tester with 15 years of overall tech and cybersecurity experience. I hold several certifications, including some CompTIA certifications, the CEH, which, you know, they tell you to get because jobs want you to get them. And then I also have my certified penetration tester, and I have a couple SAN certifications for penetration testing and web application. And last and not least, I also have my CISSP. If you've seen me before, I'm also the host of InfoSec Unplugged, which is my weekly live podcast that I do where I interview different people from all over the tech and cybersecurity field and just kind of talking about their experiences. I'm also a trainer and a LinkedIn instructor. I have a course on API security and the top 10 API vulnerabilities on LinkedIn. And last and not least, I am the owner of Alpha Cybersecurity, and I actually just opened up Alpha Esports and Technology, which is the reason why I am not here with you in person today. I'm still in Georgia, kind of finalizing the things to kind of get that stuff opened and doing different stress tests and stuff like that. So, again, I apologize for not being able to be there with you in person, but I do thank Marcel and Mary and the Society of Cyberjutsu for allowing me to be here today. So next year, though, I promise I'll be there in person. All right, so let's just kind of get right into it. So what we're going to go into the first module, which is ethical hacking. I do see some people in here saying go Air Force. Yes, absolutely. And hey, Monisha, how you doing? It's always a pleasure to see you too. So we're going to go into the definition. We're going to get into the differences of the different types of hacking or penetration testing. We're going to go into kind of who does it, why they do it, and how they do it. And then we'll just kind of do some lab exercises. So first, the legal term, well, not legal term, but the definition for ethical hacking is the practice of detecting and exploiting vulnerabilities in a computer system, application, or organization's infrastructure. Ethical hackers are tasked with performing penetration tests to scan and attempt to bypass a company's security to identify potential vulnerabilities and threats to their network. Penetration tests closely emulate real-world steps taken by malicious attackers so companies can learn how to improve their security footprint and better protect from malicious attacks. So I know you hear things on the news all the time about hacking and hackers or sophisticated attacks or nation state actors. These are all, I guess these would all fall under what you would call unauthorized or black hat hackers or malicious attackers. These are the people who use these techniques for their own gain, whether it's monetary or to steal secrets, whether it's trade secrets or nation secrets or anything like that. And they do not have permission. It's illegal. And these are the ones that you typically hear about. And then you hear about the authorized hackers, or they used to be called white hat hackers. And these are the ones who obey the rules and laws, perform their tasks. Authorized hackers are hired by organizations to test and responsibly disclose their findings. So I remember when I first started getting into ethical hacking and pen testing, I had an aunt who just could not grasp the idea that that I was actually going to classes and learning how to be a hacker, and that I could actually get a job. And she used to tell me all the time that ethical hacker was like an oxymoron because it contradicted itself, and there's no such thing. And I remember there was just this whole debate. And then later on, as I guess she started to do her research and started to see the jobs and things that I was getting, it was like, oh, okay, so that's what you do. But yeah, that's typically when you hear about hackers. Unfortunately, it's usually the negative stuff you see. Like, I think they just said the government was just hacked the other day. And the crazy part is a lot of it isn't necessarily that sophisticated or that hard to do. Sometimes it's as simple as just, sending someone a malicious link and then clicking the link. And that's why you have your authorized or your white hat hackers, because they're the ones who kind of go in and do these attacks legally with permission on these organizations so that they can protect their stuff before a malicious attacker gains access. And then you have your gray hat hackers. Your gray hat hackers, they're not malicious per se, like your black hat hackers or your unauthorized hackers, but they also are not as ethical as the authorized or white hat hackers. The gray hats, they're literally somewhat in the middle. So they do sometimes responsibly reveal security vulnerabilities. Sometimes they do it without permission. So this is the plight with the gray hat hackers. Some people will tell you that there's no such thing. Some people will tell you that they're necessary. I'm just here to tell you that they exist. I don't have an opinion on them either way. Where can you find the recording? I would talk to the team at the Women's Society of Cyberjutsu after this conference is up and see if they have the recording for you, Justin. So in going into differences between the ethical hackers and the malicious attackers, I kind of came up with this here. So ethical hackers work with companies and organizations or governments to identify potential vulnerabilities in their systems and applications. This information could be used to fix the vulnerabilities before the attackers or adversaries exploit them. Unfortunately, sometimes businesses tend to not do it because it's expensive or for budgetary reasons, but that's what the ethical hackers are doing. Where on the malicious side, they just attack the companies. They're not working with them. They're not working for them. They're not trying to help. They're trying to gain whatever advantage or benefit that they saw to attacking their target. Ethical hackers are hired to test for vulnerabilities, where attackers are not hired and they do not follow any type of scope or rules of engagement, and they don't care about a code of ethics. When you're an ethical hacker or a pen tester, you do have to go over a scope. You do have to figure out the rules of engagement. You have to figure out what's within the limits and what's off limits. Sometimes that takes longer than the actual pen test itself. Sometimes you find yourself negotiating or defining the scope and rules of engagement for a couple weeks at a time to make sure that you're not touching anything that shouldn't be touched, or that you're accessing any data that shouldn't be accessed because of the sensitive nature. So finally, ethical hackers do not steal or exfiltrate anything from the systems they're testing. They only look for gaps in the system security that could lead to the data being stolen. So one of the things I tell my mentees or my students is, when you are working on a pen test, you never take any files that you find. If you come across any personnel files or anything like that, you screenshot that you have access to it, but you do not take it, because the moment you take a file and transfer it from one machine to the other, it's no longer a penetration test. It becomes a data breach. It becomes an incident. The only thing that you can take that's usually within the rules of engagement is if you're able to access password hashes. If you're able to access passwords, then you can take the passwords, crack the passwords offline, and then move forward. But never, ever, 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 ever take a file off of a machine. I had someone who worked on a pen test one time, and it was a medical facility, and they took a patient's file. And literally we had to stop what we were doing and get legal involved, because now you have stolen someone's personally identifiable information. So you do not want to do that. You don't want to appear like you're doing that. It's just, it's messy. It can get confusing. So I typically tell my students or my junior pen testers to just, if you see it, if you can access the file, screenshotting it is just as good as taking it in the realm of a pen test. Am everybody keeping up with me so far? Does anybody have any questions so far? I don't know if they have access to turning on their microphones, but if you have any questions, you could just leave them in the chat. I will try to get to them as soon as possible. So if we're still good, we can just move right along. So the one thing that ethical hackers and malicious attackers have in common, is that they both utilize several tools, techniques, and methodologies against their targets to gain access to them. These can include brute force attacks, phishing and social engineering, tools like keyloggers to reveal any type of passwords, or crafting any type of custom exploit to gather information and gain the upper hand against their targets or victims. Again, the only difference is when you're an ethical hacker or a penetration tester or an authorized tester or a white hat hacker, whatever it is you want to call it, you do have to follow the rules of engagement. And again, I keep stressing that because the laws against hacking are very heavy-handed. Our government still doesn't quite understand, how that kind of works. And then they just, whenever they do catch someone, they just kind of throw the book at them. So with that being said, you definitely want to kind of just be careful and make sure you follow the scope and rules of engagement. You never want to break those. If you're on a pen test, and let's say you're on a web app pen test and you're clicking a link, but that link leads to another website, do not test that unless you have specific permission that you can access that website. I was just on a pen test where we were testing an application, clicked the link, it led to a Salesforce application, testing halted. You do not ever want to test something else that's out of scope. You always want to make sure you're within the scope. You always want to make sure that any IP address that you have, that they listed, you have permission to access. So you do your due diligence and make sure that that it is a legitimate site and that they do own it. Otherwise, you're going to have to answer to the real owner when you're clicking on their stuff. So let's see here. Okay, just thought I saw something here. All right, so now the next question is, how do you gain these skills, right? So one thing that you'll hear a lot, you'll hear a bunch of different debates on whether you can do boot camps or you can do webinars, you can do free trainings, you can do workshops like the one you're in right now, you can read books. And the answer to that is all of the above. There are several different resources and training platforms that you can do for free or cheap. When you're ready to start testing for certifications, that's when it gets a little bit pricier. But my go-to is typically here. So you have your combination of schools or trainings or certifications. So you have some schools here that are sponsoring this event, like SANS. If you have the money or your job's willing to pay that money to go to SANS, you have things like InfoSec Institute, or I think they just call themselves InfoSec now. That's where I learned. Shout out to Keytron Evans. He is my first teacher and mentor. You have the Cyber Mentor, who has some really great courses, and his courses are affordable. You have Try Hack Me, Hack the Box. You have so many different options. The Haiku is another one that that's up and coming. And all of these resources are really great. And then when you want to start moving into the certification realm, you can start looking at certifications like the PNPT from the Cyber Mentor. You can look at the EJT. I think INE does that one, or did EJCP? the junior pen testing one is a good one to start with. SANS has, well, and then Monisha says they actually have a lot of free academies with SANS, so you can DM her for additional info. Thank you. Sorry, Mo. And then you have like CompTIA. CompTIA has the Pen Test Plus. And then you have the CEH from EC Council. So I will reserve any type of comments on which ones you should get. These are all good ones to go with. If you just want to kind of get the skills, again, you can talk to Mo over here with the free academies, because SANS does, for what it's worth, SANS does have some really great training. And then you can also look at Udemy. You can look at videos on YouTube. There's a bunch of different books. But my number one thing I do, no matter what type of training you get, I feel like you have to get the hands-on experience, right? You can have all the certifications, you can read all the books, you can have all the knowledge, but the hands-on skills is what's going to get you the job. The knowledge will get you the interview, but the hands-on skills is going to kind of get you the job and get you paid and get you elevated in your career. And my number one go-to for that is to build a hacking lab. Now, there's many different ways you could build a hacking lab. You can do like an on-prem virtual machine environment, which is one that I still love to do. You can do one in the cloud if you're familiar with the cloud. AWS, Google, Azure, they all have cloud formats, cloud platforms that you can actually create virtual machines and labs in the cloud. I typically like to keep my on-prem stuff because I tend to forget that I left my cloud VMs on, and I don't like getting that bill at the end of the month. So I just stick to what I know will keep me from getting a massive bill, and then my wife yelling at me when I don't have any money for anything because I done blew it on my cloud budget. But for virtual machines are basically a computer image that runs in a hypervisor program. So just think of it as a computer within a computer. There's several different ones. There's VMware workstation, that's free. You have VirtualBox. Microsoft has Hyper-V, and then when we were talking about the cloud, there's AWS, there's Google Cloud, there's Microsoft Azure, and then you could also have create VMs or certain labs in a Docker environment, a container environment within your operating system. So what I do for a lot of my stuff, I'll have a virtual machine, I have a virtual Linux machine, but then I have a Docker container in my virtual machine so that I can just kind of turn it off and turn it on from there. And then I can just do what I need to do and then move forward with my pen testing. So for the purpose of this workshop, we're going to be using VirtualBox. That's one of the first ones that you can use. It's free. It's kind of cut and dry to work with. And that's actually going to be our first lab. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to install VirtualBox, and then we're going to install our Kali Linux VM. And then we will also install our target environment called Basic Pen Test 1. And we'll put them in VirtualBox, and then we'll get them to communicate with each other via a NAT network. So if anyone needs a couple minutes or anything to download the files, you can do that now. If not, just let me know and we could just move forward. Going once. No, we're jumping ahead. There we go. Oh, thank you. That answers Justin's question from earlier. The recording will be on the Hoover app. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this real quick. And then I'm going to bring up my VirtualBox environment. then I will share that. Okay. All right. Everybody can see my VirtualBox screen here. Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me bring this up here. I'm going to turn this off. Okay. So if you downloaded the files, you should have the first file you should have gotten is a Kali Linux file, and it was saved in, I guess, as a 7-zip file. So if you have if you have 7-zip installed on your machine, you can oh, I'm still showing the wrong thing here. Hold, please. Sharing. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and that one. Okay. Shall we share the screen? Okay. Just gonna jump around between a bunch of screens. So if you see here, it's a 7-zip file. So all you have to do is just right click. If you have like Windows 10 or 11, you can go to show more options. 7-zip will show up right there, and then you can just kind of extract the file. It'll take a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, couple seconds, and you should then get this folder here with everything you need. So you see here, there's a VDI. This is a virtual disk image file. This is basically your hard drive. And then this is the VBox image. So this is the actual VirtualBox machine. So what you're going to want to do is, now I got to stop that because I'm going back and forth. There we go. So now what you want to do in VirtualBox, let me just move this over here, is if you go to add, and you go to the folder that you just unzipped, the Kali Linux image, which is my old image here. But if you go here, click this, and then you'll see that here's the VBox. So then you just double click that, and it'll automatically install. So I already have mine installed here. So once you kind of get that one done, it'll take a second for all of this files to load and carry over. And then for the basic pen test 1, it's very similar to the other one. So what you do is you actually don't have to hit the add image. You can literally just go to the folder that you had where you downloaded it. Give me a second. Okay. So you go over here back to where you downloaded this original file. So this is where we downloaded it. I downloaded it originally from vulnhub.com. I think I put the link in the folder, or I just put the file in the folder. But what you do is you now for that one, you just literally double click it. And once you and if you have VirtualBox installed, it'll ask you. I'll actually show you. Sorry, I have like so many different windows open right now. Okay. Okay, so if you see here, it wants to name the file CSEC. That's fine. I actually just named it basic pen test 1. So if you want to change it, you can just double click it and then name it what you want to name it there. And then you can keep most of the setting. You can keep the settings at the default. You don't really need to beef up this VM for anything. And then when you're done, you just click finish. And then the last thing you want to do is there's actually 2 things you want to do. One, if you downloaded everything from the Google folder, there should be an expansion file for VirtualBox. You just want to install that because I don't know if it does it for VirtualBox 7, but I know with the older versions, it caused some issues when you were using a Linux machine. So the expansion package kind of fixes those issues. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to create a NAT network to get them to communicate with each other. So what you do is, if you go over here and here you see this list icon here, if you click it and you go to network, you'll see here it opens up these 3 tabs. There's host only networks, NAT networks, and then cloud networks. You want to move over to NAT networks. And then you see, well, I already have one created for my API class. But what you want to do is you want to click create. And then you see there it says NAT network. And then all you have to do here is you could double click it, or you can right click and hit properties. And then down here at the bottom, here's a general option. So if you want to change the name, I'll just name it pen test. And then you can have your IPv4 prefix. The default here is like the 10.0.2.0/24 network. I'm just going to do 192.168.10.0/24. And then you just make sure enable DHCP is turned on, and then you just hit apply. And then now you have your NAT network over here. So now what you want to do after you do that, you want to go over to the VMs once they're over here and installed. So we'll start with the Kali Linux one. You could go to Kali Linux, you can hit the settings, and then go down here to where it says network. And then again, you see there's different adapters. What you do is you just hit this drop down box, and then you just click NAT network, and then you click the network that you just created. So in my case, I created the pen test one. So you do that and then hit OK. And then the same thing you want to do with the basic pen test. Go down, hit network, NAT network, and then hit pen test, and then hit OK. Are we good so far? Am I moving too fast? Do I need to go back? Does anybody need help with anything? I'm going to take the no answer as we're good. Let's double check over here. Okay. Okay. We're good. We're good. And all right. So we're just I need to close this one off. Okay. So the last thing that I want to just make sure that we're good. So the last thing you just want to do is you just want to turn them on. So you just go to your Kali Linux machine. You can hit the start button, or you can just kind of double click it. It'll take a second to say that it's powering up. And then you'll get this little message here about the auto capture. So your keyboard, it captures your keyboard and mouse strokes. You can just close that out. And then you can go ahead and also just turn on the basic pen test 1 machine. Like I said, and this is going to take a second for it to load up, but typically I just want to make sure that you can see the machine. So if you look here, hold on, it doesn't look like it's showing up on when I'm looking at the replay. The joys of live streaming. All right, so typically what you want to do is just make sure you turn them on and you can see them. For Kali Linux, I'm going to put it in the chat, but the username for your Kali Linux machine, the default user and password is Kali, and the password is also Kali. And then for the basic pen test 1, you should see this screen here for Marlinspike. You won't know the password because that's the whole purpose of the VM. We have to try to figure out what that password is. So if you see these two screens, you're good to move forward. And that's where we end this lab. So if you if you want to take a quick 5-minute break, you can go ahead now. We'll be back at I have 3:41. We'll be back at 3:46 or 3:47, just to kind of get the cobwebs out and see what's going on with my stuff. And I'm going to do some quick troubleshooting. So if anybody has any questions, I will be right here, but let's just take 5 minutes. How's everybody enjoying the conference so far? Okay, so we're gonna get right back into it. Again, we're kind of pressed on time. I did just leave a question in the chat. Just wanted to know how everybody was enjoying this conference this year. So we're gonna move right into the next module, which is the hacking distributions and the Linux basics. So first, we're going to go into what is Linux. So Linux is a family of open source Unix operating systems based on a Linux kernel. It was created by Linus Torvalds. Linux is used in computers, mobile devices, smart homes, cars, you name it. There's probably a Linux kernel or a Linux operating system somewhere in the background. Even your Apple devices basically are Linux. So and then finally, Linux has different versions. They're called flavors. So there's Debian, there's like Red Hat. There's a bunch of different flavors of Linux. They're also called distributions or distros for short, and the different distributions match whatever needs you have. I love the topics being covered. Wish they all had been streamed, but a great experience. Oh, yeah. Like I said, I'm glad I'm here to kind of stream this one. Like I said, I wish I was there in person though. So when you're talking about ethical hacking, there's typically, I mean, there's a bunch of different distributions, but for the main three, there's Kali Linux, there's Parrot OS, and then there's Black Arch Linux. So Kali Linux is the most common one. I'm just going to kind of go back real quick. Parrot OS has a secure. Parrot OS is a different operating system, but they actually have a security one for pen testing and forensics and everything. I actually really like Parrot OS. And then there's Black Arch Linux. Black Arch Linux is takes some getting used to. I won't say it's harder than the others, but it's definitely not as user friendly as Parrot or Kali Linux. Again, we're going to kind of focus here on Kali Linux, but Kali Linux was formerly known as Backtrack, and it is Debian based. So that's what we were talking about earlier with the flavors and everything. And it's maintained by offensive security. Kali Linux is mainly used, I see a typo there, but it's Kali Linux is mainly used for penetration testing, security auditing, and digital forensics. Kali, another reason why I like Kali Linux is it comes with over 600 tools installed by default. A lot of the other ones you kind of have to install what you want or when you want it. Kali kind of already has them installed, but the flip side to that is that the Kali images or the Kali machines, they tend to be a lot more when you're talking about hard drive and memory space. Kali is also the most common hacking distribution used by penetration testers and red teams. Yep, Andre says that they've used Parrot as a bootable for forensic acquisitions. No, I actually enjoy Parrot OS a lot. But like I said, I go back and forth between Kali and Parrot, and then when you start moving into things like application security, there's other tools and things that you use. But those are typically my two go-to for pen testing. Also, then you go into the Linux file system. So Linux is very different than your Windows file system, where Windows has like a C drive and then you have your desktop and all that. Linux doesn't really have too much of that. Linux has a root drive, and then they have like the binary folder or the bin folder. Then they have the options folder where you can kind of install a couple things. They have a boot folder, root, and then all of these here. I'm not going to kind of go down the whole list again. I'm trying to make sure we catch up on time for the hands-on stuff. But in this slide here, here's a quick rundown of each of the folders that you see. These aren't all of them, but these are some of the more common ones. So like I said, you have your bin folder, which contains the binary. You have your boot for the booting of the system, the etc file, which is like the system-wide configuration files. Your home folder, that would basically be like your user folder. Your shared libraries for 32 or 64-bit. Then you have your mount and your media drives, optional software packages. The home directory is root. the data services or the services folder is the SRV, and then the temp is a temporary folder. We use a temporary folder a lot as hackers when we're doing any type of assessments and like we need to move files over. We typically move them over to the temp folder because they're deleted once you turn off the computer and reboot it. So it's essentially just covering your own tracks. And then you have your user related folder and then your var folder. And then with Linux, there's also a bunch of different commands. So you have your apt-get or your apt. So this is the package management command for Debian base. So to update, upgrade, or remove software packages, you're going to run some type of apt-get or just apt. So for example, if you want to update, if you want to install updates or upgrade your Kali Linux machine, you're going to hit apt-get update or apt-get upgrade, and then it's going to ask you, typically it's probably going to ask you, do you have elevated permissions to do so? And that's where you go back and say yes, and you use this command called sudo. So sudo gives you root privileges. Again, you have to kind of know the password, so I'll show that demo in a second. But when you're doing sudo privileges, you go sudo apt-get install or sudo apt-get update or upgrade, and then it'll ask you for a password. You type in your password and then it'll go through. CD changes the directory. In Windows, I believe it's like chdir or something like that. But actually, I think in Windows now you can actually do some Linux commands. So I think you can actually do CD. The current working directory is print working directory is pwd. To make a new directory is mkdir. If you want to remove a file or directory, you hit rm, copy, cp, move. And if you want to create a new file, you can just type touch, and then you can display the contents of a file or concatenate it, multiple files together using the cat command. Here's some other ones for like if you want to search for specific patterns or files. You can use grep. Find is another one to kind of locate different files and directories. Changing the permissions of a file or directory is chmod or chmod. So that one you would have to figure out. You'd have to do, like, for example, you do chmod 7, will never do 777. But if you do that, then basically you're giving yourself full read, write, and execute access to that file or folder. And then here's some other ones. So if you want to connect to a remote server using the SSH, you just use SSH. If you want to do a secure copy, you do SCP. Ping, everyone kind of done ping once or twice before if you're trying to send any type of request or to check for any type of live host on your system. ifconfig is the equivalent to ipconfig in Windows, where you want to get the user interface or your IP address. Man, if some of the Linux tools have manuals or manual pages, you type man and then the tool name, and then it'll give you a quick rundown. And then history will show the command history. So for this next one, we're going to use the Linux terminal, and we're going to make, move, copy, and delete a file. So I just wanted to kind of do a quick exercise here just to show what I'm talking about. So I'm going to bring up my Kali Linux machine here. And again, like I said, if you want to follow along, or if you're following along and you need me to slow down, just yell at me in the chat. So here we have Kali. It's going to load a little slow because we're live right now. There we go. All right, so the first thing I typically do when I have a new Kali machine is I'm gonna go apt-get -y and then hit update. And then you'll see here, it gave me an error message saying permission is denied. And that's because I didn't give it root privileges. So I have to go sudo. Actually, I can just go hit the up tab, hit the up button. It'll give me the last command I typed. And then I just kind of go to the back, and then I hit sudo apt-get y update. It's going to ask me for my password. So the password for Callie is Callie. And then we're just going to kind of update it. So I'm just going to kind of just show you what the update is like. I'm not going to do any type of upgrade or distribution upgrades because that might take a little longer. And again, we're here till 5 o'clock and we are already approaching an hour. So if we want to make a file, first we want to clear the screen. So you just hit clear. And then if we want to make a file, we can just hit, we can do touch, and then let's call it hello.txt. And I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to hit sudo just in case. Okay. And then if I hit the ls, which lists everything in the folder or in the directory that we're in, you'll see that there is a file called hello.txt right here. So that's how we just quickly made a file right there. Now let's say we want to put it in a folder. We're going to then say sudo, and let's make a folder. So we're going to go sudo make directory, and we're going to call it, if I can spell, cyberjutsu. Okay, so now if we hit ls, you'll see we have a folder there called cyberjutsu. And now we want to move the hello.txt into the cyberjutsu folder. So what we do is we'll do sudo mv for move, and then we'll say hello.txt, and then we'll put it, and then we'll say cyberjutsu, and then we'll also call that, we'll still call it hello.txt. So now if you hit ls again, you'll see that the hello.txt file has been moved. But if you move into the cyberjutsu folder, which is change directory, cyberjutsu, and then you hit ls again, you'll see the folder, you'll see the file is there. Now, what if we said we want it in multiple places? We'll do sudo cp hello.txt, and we'll call it hello2.txt. Again, I have to learn how to type. So now if you hit ls again, you'll see there's two files there. And then finally, we just want to go ahead and delete it. So now we'll say sudo, again, learn how to spell, sudo, and then we'll say rm hello2.txt. And then if you just hit ls, you'll see that we deleted that one. And then we can just kind of go back to the main directory again by just typing in cd. And then if you want to make sure, it usually tells you anyway, like if you saw when we were in the cyberjutsu folder, it said /cyberjutsu. But if you want to make sure you're back in the main directory where you started, you just type in pwd, and then you'll see you are in your home Kali folder. So does anyone have any questions? I think I might have moved through that one a little too fast, but if you have any questions, let me know. Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, so we'll just minimize this, and now we'll move on to the next one. So now we're moving into the world of penetration testing. So we're going to go into the first phase of pen testing, which is reconnaissance and enumeration. So when you go and when you work on a pen test, traditionally there are about 5 or maybe 6 phases of a pen test. The one phase that I don't have here is basically the pre-engagement. That's where we talked about going through the process of determining the scope, rules of engagement, what can you touch, what can't you touch, Are there any type of anything sensitive in nature that you want us to avoid? Is there anything is there a specific goal that you want us to try to go for? Sometimes you'll have some clients who will say, hey, we have a file in the CEO's folder. Can you get to it? And again, we see if we can get to it, making sure we don't transfer it, but making sure we can access it. So after the initial phase, then you have your reconnaissance and enumeration, scanning and analysis, exploitation or gaining access, post-exploitation or privilege escalation and uncovering tracks, and then the report writing. So in your reconnaissance and enumeration, this is the initial phase. So this is understanding the organization's objectives, scoping the test, and then you use this infrastructure, use the infrastructure and the architecture and any type of applications to identify any type of entry points. So again, depending on the pen test, when you do a pen test, they can give you 3 types of pen tests, very similar to what we talked about with the types of hackers. There is a white box or crystal box pen test. There is a black box or zero knowledge pen test. And then there's a gray box pen test. So a crystal box or white box pen test is when they kind of give you all the information. They tell you, okay, these are the IP addresses you can hit. This is what you can do. These are the applications. Do you need any type of user accounts? Here's the user accounts to access these applications. You're basically given everything. And it's what is known as basically an assumed breach pen test. So in a white box or crystal box scenario, the client is basically assuming that someone already has access to the network or someone already has knowledge of the application. And now they're trying to see what they can do once they get into the network. It can be the internal network, it can be the external network, but they're basically assuming that you can gain access. They're not wrong, because typically the initial access comes from, phishing, or social engineering, where you get a user to click a malicious link and now you have access to their system, which is already on the network that you're targeting. A black box or zero knowledge pen test is just that. You absolutely have no knowledge and you have to kind of do it on your own. Those typically are a little bit more expensive if you're in the realm of selling pen tests. Because now you're spending some time having to get the information. So doing your open source intelligence, doing your recon and getting all this information, and then having to craft, whether it's the phishing or social engineering, or figure out how you're going to get that initial foothold into the network. And then you have the gray box, where they kind of give you some information, but not all of it. So for example, they might give you access to, they might give you the internal application URL, but they don't tell you how to get into it. Or they give you access to the application and they might give you a user access, but they give you like a low-level user that can't see anything, and now you have to kind of determine how to elevate your own privileges and escalate through the and pivot through the application. So I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that is typically what happens in your reconnaissance and enumeration. This is where you're trying to use whatever information you can gather to figure out what your next phase is, what the next phase is going to entail. And that's typically your scanning and analysis. So in your scanning and enumeration, or your reconnaissance and enumeration, this is where you're trying to figure out, for example, if they give you a network and they say, hey, we have 10 machines. This is a small business, so we have 10 machines on our network, and you need to get, and we're going to give you access to our network, but now you have to find the IP addresses or the devices that are on that network. This is where you're doing your things like your ping scans or your net discover scans to kind of see if you can see what IP addresses are on there. And then once you kind of get your list of IP addresses, now you can move to your scanning and analysis phase. Now, this is where you're doing some more of your active scanning, and we're going to kind of get into we're going to get into the difference between active scanning and passive scanning shortly. But this is where you're doing your Nmap scans, your NIC2 scans if it's a web application. This is where you're trying to see what ports are open, what services are available. And then once you kind of get that information, you move from the scanning part of that phase to the analysis phase. Now you're looking into ports and you're saying, okay, well, it says this service is open and it's running this version of this service. Now you're doing your research and seeing if that version is vulnerable to anything, or is the application vulnerable to anything? Are they using something like a WordPress website? What type of applications are they running on the WordPress website, or add-ons or plugins are they using on the WordPress website? Are they using the up-to-date version of WordPress? These are all questions that you have to kind of figure out during the analysis phase. And then once you have your analysis phase done, now you know, okay, this is running this version of this service is over here is outdated. Are they vulnerable, or is there any type of exploits out there? Now you're looking to see online if there's any type of exploits. You're using tools to see if there's anything out there as far as a public exploit is concerned, and then you move into the exploitation phase. Now this is where you're taking the information that you have and you're trying to exploit your targets. You're trying to see if the vulnerabilities lead to gaining that foothold or gaining that access into that target. Once you successfully exploit, it's essentially starting all over again with the reconnaissance. Now you're trying to see what else you can do for the purpose of the post-exploitation or the privilege escalation process. So now once you gain access to that system, you're jumping from, think of it as jumping from your computer to someone else's computer. And now you have to see, well, what do they have on that machine? What files do they have there? Again, we just want to see what we can access. We don't want to steal anything. But what services are they running? Oh, there's a version of something here. They're running a vulnerable kernel version. Can I exploit that to gain access and elevate my privileges? So now you want to go from whatever level user you were when you jumped to that computer to root or admin or domain admin, depending on the type of machine or operating system or environment you're in. And then you have your reporting. This is where you're just putting all of it together. I typically call the reporting phase the most important phase of the pen test, because this is what gets you paid. So the pen test shows that you can do it. The pen test shows your ability, but writing the report and writing the report effectively is what will get you paid or repeat customers. Typically, I say when you're writing a report, you're talking to 3 different people. You're talking to the executives, you're talking to the technical folks, and then you're talking to some type of people that are in between. So the executives, you don't want to get highly technical. You almost want to, I hate to say this, but you want to kind of dumb it down. And then with the technical folks, this is where you're going with you're doing your narrative. So you're showing every step you made, everything you've done. You're showing your screenshots. You're explaining the impact of the things that you found, and then you're showing how they should fix it and why they should fix it. And then you have everything else in between. Okay. Any questions so far? Am I talking too fast? Did I lose anybody? Is everybody still awake? Okay. All right, so we're just gonna kind of push through. So again, just kind of reconnaissance and enumeration. This is the initial phase, understanding the organization's objectives. So we kind of talked about that. And then here's where I was talking about with the reconnaissance. So you have your passive scanning, and then you have your active scanning. Thank you, Joan. I appreciate it. So your passive scanning, this is collecting information without directly interacting with the target systems. This is less intrusive and relies on observing the network traffic and analyzing publicly available information. So again, this is where you're doing things like Google hacking, or using tools like Shodan, or using things like open source intelligence, maybe doing DNS enumeration. If you're on the network, you're using something like Wireshark, where it's just kind of sniffing the package. You're not actually doing anything to the target. So passive scanning is, again, using public information, using things that can't actually touch the target, but most importantly, it also doesn't let them know that you're scanning them. And then you have your active scanning. this is where you're doing things a little bit more direct. This is where you're doing your port scans. This is where you're actually running a vulnerability scan, or you're doing things with Metasploit. So if they have any type of endpoint protection or anything like that in place, it might ding you, or it might catch what you're doing. So you try to do a little bit of both. You believe it or not, you can actually get a lot of information with open source intelligence. I'll give a funny story. The other day we were talking to a friend, and they were going back and forth, and they were like, oh yeah, you can't, you don't know what I do for a living, or you don't know the new job I got. And between me and my wife, like I'm the technical one, but my wife is like the detective. But between the two of us, we just kind of started looking around, and in like 30 minutes, we were able to tell them exactly where they worked and what building and on what floor and everything. And that's because they posted things to social media. So they posted a screenshot of their plane ticket, and then they posted a picture of like their Uber ride. And so we were able to get that information. And then from that information, we figured out where they were going. And then we used Google Maps from Google Maps to see a picture of the building. And then we Googled the building and saw what offices were in that building. And then we just kind of went from there. Then the other thing you can also do is just kind of look them up if they have something on LinkedIn. So you put it's kind of just putting all the pieces together. Same thing with systems. You have tools like Shodan that kind of give you information because it scans the machines on the internet and kind of puts it in that database. So now you can kind of look at that stuff there before you even touch the target system. And then, like I said, with your active scan, the downside to it is sometimes you might not get the right information. Sometimes it might be false positives, and then you still have to do the active scanning. So with the active scanning, you do also get some false positives, but it's a little bit more accurate. It is a lot more intrusive than passive scanning, because now you're actually sending packets and probes and everything to the target system. So this is, again, like I said, where you're doing like your Nmap scans and things of that nature. So this is one you can do at home. We're not going to do it here. So using only Google and social media and public information, find out as much information about yourself, your job, or family members or friends as you can. I will give the disclaimer that if you're going to pick someone, you should just, ask them for permission. Let's not scare people or think that we're crazy stalkers or anything like that. But but I do this when I kind of talk to clients who don't have an understanding of how open source intelligence works. Lately, what I've been doing is I actually try to do a lot of cybersecurity at home type things. So I talk to a lot of people in my neighborhood and in my community. And, it's almost like a scared straight approach where you're talking to them and you're saying, oh, okay, well, do you mind if I just kind of probe and look around for a little bit? And again, you're not scanning their machines, you're just using the information that they have available. And then from that information, you're saying, oh, well, look, I have this information. This is what I found, and sometimes they know that they have that information and sometimes they don't know. So it's a great, it's a great way to see how much information is about yourself online. I do this every few months and see what information's on there, and then I just go ahead and delete a bunch of things. Same thing with my wife and my kids and things like that. So just when you get a chance, just use social media and use Google. There's a Google hacking database. Google hacking or Google dorking is a technique where you can basically specify what you want to look for Google. So if you want to look for just text files or things like that, you can literally narrow down your Google searches to be a lot more accurate and precise. Case in point, I was working for a financial institution one time, and I was able to find a spreadsheet that they had online with a bunch of information that they weren't ready to release until like the next quarter, but it was available. I was able to find it from a Google search. So again, just typically do that. And I call it hacking yourself, or OSINT on yourself. So now we're moving into the scanning and vulnerability analysis. Again, we're pushing against the clock, so we're going to kind of speed through. So just stick with me, everybody. All right, so scanning. Pen testers utilize various scanning tools and techniques to discover active systems, open ports, and services. They perform network scans such as port scanning and vulnerability scanning to identify potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited. So here's one of the tools that you can use, or that you can use, especially with the virtual environment that we created. So the first tool is called Net Discover. It's a network reconnaissance tool for passive host discovery. So it's just identifying what live hosts are on the network. So you sit on the network, you're given an IP address, and you say, okay, well, if I have this IP address 192.168.100.5, okay, well, let's see what's on the entire network. So now you do a net discover -R for the range, and you do 192.168.100.0/24. So now you're telling it to look for any IP address with in that range, and if it's alive. And then once you get your live host, then you can turn around and say, all right, well, now let's see what we can find with that. So now you use Nmap and Network Mapper. This was created by Gordon Fyodor Lyon. Nmap is a network scanning tool that can discover and scan hosts and services by sending different packets to analyze the responses. Nmap can also do things like discovering operating systems, firewalls, packet filters, and can even do vulnerability scanning. Nmap also has like a whole library of scripts you can use as well, for different purposes, whether you want to look for a specific vulnerability or if you want to look for what the version of encryption they're using. Nmap has a ton of different scripts. I totally encourage you to go look up Nmap. Even if you're not doing pen testing, if you're doing anything in cybersecurity, Nmap is a great tool to use. Same thing, there's another one called Netcat. But Nmap is a great one to use. So Nmap has a wide range of options and flags to customize the behavior of the scan. Some of the common ones you'll see is like -P. So this is if you want to specify what port or port range you want to scan. So for example, if you know if only port 80 is open, you can say, all right, fine, Nmap -P 80. Because now you want to narrow the scan down, because by default, Nmap looks for the default, I think it's something like 1,000 ports, and each IP address can have up to 65,536 ports open. So you want to make sure that when you want to scan for everything, you scan for everything, but if you want to narrow it down and you know the ports are open, then you narrow it down. And then you can do different type of scans. So you can do a SYN scan or a TCP scan. This is where the SYN scan only does the one part of a TCP handshake. So how networks communicate with each other is called a TCP handshake. It's a three-way communication where it's like, hey, are you available? That's the SYN. So it's sending the SYN packet. The acknowledge packet or the ACK packet is the target system saying, yes, I am available. And then the last one is essentially making that connection. So with Nmap, you can actually break down how you want to do the handshake. So if you want to do like just a SYN scan where it's not doing the whole packet, the whole TCP handshake, you can, and then you can do the TCP connect scan. That's more accurate and more established than the SYN scan. You can also do a UDP scan to scan the UDP ports. It's typically slower than a TCP scan. And remember, UDP, well, not remember, where TCP does a three-way handshake, UDP does not. So UDP is basically like best effort. So these are things like your voice over IP phones, streaming, so your webcam, those use UDP packets. So when you notice like packets are dropping, or if the song skips that when you're streaming, that's because it's a UDP packet and one of the packages must have dropped during the stream. You have an aggressive scan, which looks for operating system and version. You have the O, which is just operating system. Verbose is where you're telling it the level of verbosity. N is if you want to do no DNS resolution. SV, which is a popular one, that's a service scan. So that's where you look to see what services are running on the ports and what version of them are they using. PN is no ping. And then SC or S capital C is using default Nmap scripts. Those are the scripts that I talked about earlier. And then if you want to pick a script specifically, then you do the -- script and then the name of the script. So the next tool you can use is NIC2. So NIC2 is a web vulnerability scanner. So this is where if you notice during your scans that port 80 is open and then you go on there and you determine, oh, there's a website or a web application there. You can use NIC2 to scan for any type of misconfigurations or vulnerabilities. And then you also have Netcat. So this is like known as the Swiss Army knife, but it does everything. It can do port scanning, it can do banner grabbing, it can be a listener. You can send messages with it. You can use it for a backdoor for exploitation. So for example, if you gain access to a system and you want to create a backdoor, you can use Netcat and tell it to listen on a specific port from that machine and then go to your machine and tell it to connect to that port that it's listening to. And now you have another connection in there. And then here are some of the commonly used flags used with Netcat. So now we're going to go back to our VM and we're going to use NetDiscover and Nmap to determine where we are on our network. So I'm going to bring up my VM. Hopefully it doesn't do anything stupid. So we're going to log back in. I can't type. Again, I can't type. There we go. All right, so we're going to clear the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to first I'm going to do I'm going to go sudo and then I'm going to say if config. And again, it's going to ask me for my password. So as you see here, I have an IP address of 192.168.10.4. So with that information, now what I want to do is I'll go sudo clear first, and then I'll do sudo netdiscover -r 192.168. No, sorry. My number lock was off. Sudo netdiscover -r 192.168.10.0/24. Like I said, it shouldn't take too long. So now here you see there's 1, there's 2, there's .3 and .5. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. So you hold down Control and press C to cancel the process. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in Nmap. And we're not going to do any flags just yet. We're going to do 192.168.10.5. And now what you see there, it just kind of scanned the top 1,000 ports. And it came back with 3 ports open. So port 21, which is an FTP service, port 22, which is SSH, and then port 80, which is TCP. So that tells us that there's a web application there. So if we open up our Firefox browser, and now we just type in 192.168.10.5, you'll see it says this is the default page for the server. So we do know that there's some type of web application. We just don't know where just yet. So let me see. I'm trying to see if I need to jump ahead anywhere. Okay. All right. So so now with that information we're just going to kind of go back and we're going to kind of get specific with our scans. So now we know that we have port 21, 22, and 80 open. So now we're going to go Nmap. I'm going to say -SV for service scan, -P, and then we're going to say 21, 22. No, I keep saying 22. 21, 2280. Yeah, let's just go with that. So for now. Oh, I didn't type in the IP address. So SV-P, and then we're going to go 192.168.10.5. So now we're going to run that. But while we're running that, because again, we're racing against the clock here. I am going to split the terminal horizontally. Actually, no, I don't like that one. I want to go collapse that one, and then I want to go vertically. So then what I'll do here is I will go sudo nic2-h 192.168.10.5, and then type in the password. And then we'll let that one run for a little while. So while we're looking at that, we see port 21 is running this version of the FTP service. So it's running pro FTPD 1.3.3C. 22 is running an OpenSSH version 7.2 P2. And then 80 is running this version of Apache. And then if you look over here, you'll see the NIC2 scan ran, and it is telling us here that the same information is running. It might be running 2.4.18 for Apache, and it appears to be outdated. It's telling us the different HTTP methods. It's telling us that there's a secret folder. And then there is, let's see if there's anything else interesting here. I don't know. Let's find out. So it says secret. This may be interesting. So we go here, we bring this back up. And then we say secret. And now it says it showed us that we're at a secret blog site. So those are just some quick examples of what you can do when you're doing some active scanning. So now let's kind of go back to, let's go back to the slides real quick. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go. Oops. Okay, so now moving here with the analysis portion of the pen test. This is again where we're looking at the information and examining the results from our scans. So that's kind of what we were doing earlier. We just kind of briefly looked at what versions was running where and what the service was and what versions were running on which ports. So here's where you're going to review the Nmap scans, you're going to review your vulnerability scans, and then you're going to search for possible exploits. So one of the tools we use to look for exploits is a script or a tool called Searchploit. It's a command line utility. It's part of the exploit database project, and it's used to search information about known vulnerabilities from the database and see if there's anything you can find. And then here's, again, just a list of things that you can use to help you narrow down your search with Searchploit. So now with that, we're just kind of going to move into the analysis phase. So we kind of started it already, but we're going to use Searchploit to look for the vulnerability. So we're going to go here. We're going to say sudo. Actually, let's clear this out. Let's clear this, and then we're going to go ahead and we're just going to delete this terminal. We're going to collapse the terminal too. Okay, so now we're going to go sudo Searchploit, and then we're looking for pro FTPD is like 1.3.3. So now if you look here, when you go to search exploit and we looked up the pro FTP, it came back with a list of different vulnerabilities or different exploits. So here, this looks like a buffer overflow. This is also another buffer overflow. This is a backdoor remote code execution. And then this is also remote command. And then this is a backdoor command execution for Metasploit. So what we see here is that 1, 2, 3 out of the 5 are available in Metasploit. And then the other ones, they look like they might be manual exploits. So if we wanted to look further, we could either go to this path here, or if we wanted to, we could go hit tab to come back up to that one. And I believe it's -W. And now this gives us the actual web page. So let's just click this one here, and then we'll open a link. And then here's where you can kind of look more for more information into the vulnerability. So you can see here is a Metasploit exploit. It's been verified. So you want to be very careful when looking for public exploits, because sometimes if you don't know what you're looking for, it could be someone trolling and you end up backdooring yourself. So what I've seen happen in the past is people who weren't paying attention or who weren't, very knowledgeable, found a public exploit online, and then they used the public exploit, wonder why it didn't work. But the problem is it worked too well, because what it ended up doing was actually sending a reverse shell back to the person who created the exploit. So now they have access to the person's computer who thought they were trying to do it to gain access to whatever target they were using. So be very careful. So what they did with the exploit database is they went through these and verified them. So if you see the check mark, it's supposed to be safe, but I always say trust but verify. Do your own research. And here it just kind of breaks down the exploit here. Metasploit is written in Ruby. So if you're familiar with like Python or any type of programming languages, Ruby's another one. And like I said, it's not too hard to understand. It's kind of cut and dry. And if you do have knowledge of other programming languages, it's not hard to kind of decipher what's going on here. So with that being said, we'll move on to the next phase. Now we're moving into the exploitation. So we're going to do exploitation and then post exploitation at the same time. So exploitation this is where you're gaining access. So again, once your vulnerabilities are identified and the penetration testers attempt to exploit to gain unauthorized access. They may use various techniques like password cracking, social engineering, or exploiting software vulnerabilities. The goal is to demonstrate how an attacker could gain access to sensitive information or compromised systems. And we're going to use a tool called Metasploit. So Metasploit was originally released in 2004. It's open source, but there's also a commercial version. It's being maintained by Rapid7. They bought the rights back in like 2009. And the commercial version has a GUI base, but the free version of Metasploit is all from the command prompt or the command terminal. And then also we have the exploit database. So that's where we just look to see where you can get that exploit from. So again, it's a comprehensive collection of known exploits and vulnerabilities that's also maintained by Offensive Security. So Offensive Security maintains Kali Linux. They also own the exploit database. You could also find information from the Google hacking database on the exploit database. And Offensive Security also has the OSCP certification as well. So you'll hear that name a lot as far as the company, but also penetration testing or red teaming is considered offensive security. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to use Metasploit to exploit the vulnerabilities that we found in the FTP service. And we have 25 minutes. So we're gonna speed hack this here. So we're going to bring up our machine. So here we have, this is the exploit we're going to use, right? So we're going to do this and we're going to close this out. And then we're going to clear this. And then to call up to open up Metasploit, we're going to go sudo, and the command is called msf console. It's going to take a second for that to load. All right, so we see here where Metasploit has this nice little picture here. Let me move this out of the way. Please stop. Thank you. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to search for Pro FTP D. And here's all the exploits that we found earlier. So here was the buffer overflow. Here was the other buffer overflow. Actually, here's the third buffer overflow. 4 buffer overflows, and then here's the backdoor that we looked up before. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use this one. So number 5. But if you look here, here's the date that they were disclosed, and here's their rank. So if you want to find out the success possibility of it, you can look here. So it's excellent, great, and then this one here is set to average. Here these vulnerabilities here, these exploits here, they actually check before the exploit is ran to see if it is indeed vulnerable. And then you see that this one and this one doesn't, and then it just kind of gives a brief description of the vulnerability. So since we decided we're going to use exploit number 5, we're just going to type in use 5. And then it kind of auto populates that one for that option. And then what we want to do is we want to get the information. So what we want to do here is we want to see what we got. What do we have to put in here to make sure it works? So it's looking for our host. So this is the target IP address. The port is already set to 21 because it is an FTP service. We also want to make sure, I don't see it here, but we also want to make sure that we set up a payload, and we're going to create a reverse shell. So what we want to do is, first, the thing we want to do is we want to set the R host. So we hit set R host, and the target was 192.168.10.5. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to set our payload. And for this one, the most popular payload for Metasploit is called a interpreter shell. But sometimes some targets or some operating systems don't allow you to use a interpreter shell. So we're just going to go ahead and use a regular reverse command shell. So for that, we're going to type in Unix. And then if you hit tab, sometimes it'll auto-complete for you. But what you want to do is you want to set the payload. I believe, like I said, I want to say it's Unix CMD reverse. The specified for payload is not valid. Okay, hold on. Weird. There we go. I had it backwards. It was command Unix reverse. Okay, and then we want to again just double check that we have everything here. So we hit we could do info, but we could also do something called show options. And I'm glad we didn't just go ahead and hit exploit, because we still need to add one more thing. So L host, this is the listening host. So this is our IP address. So if I remembered, it was .4. I don't remember. Okay, so we're gonna go sudo ifconfig Kali, and yes, we're 10.4. So we'll just go ahead and we'll collapse it, and then we will set the L host to 192.168.10.4. 192.168.10.4. And once we have everything that we need, so we made sure that our R host was set, the port was set, the listening port is already set to default on 4444, and then our L host. So one more time, we'll just show options and make sure everything is loaded properly. And it looks like we're good. So the last thing we need to do is just type in the word exploit. And now Metasploit is going to work is exploitation magic. So here is sending the reverse, is sending the handler from this address, from our address. It's sending the backdoor command. It looks like it was accepted. So now it's writing to the sockets. And now it says command shell session 1 opened. And typically, if you want to see if you have access, you can just type in PWD for print working directory. You'll see we are in, looks like we are in their root folder. And if you type in, who am I? We are root on this machine. So now if you want to drop into a shell, it's going to take a second to drop into the shell, I believe. And there's our shell. And when you, anytime you see this little hashtag, that's indicative of root on a Linux machine. So if you see this, you know you have root privileges. So we're going to stop right there, and then we're just going to go back to the slides real quick. 442, we're still making good time. So now post exploitation after gaining access. So typically what I would say this, if you get root, it's typically game over. You can honestly just say, hey, I got root, but you also want to show impact. So what you do after this is, now this is where you're looking to establish your foothold. So you can do anything to escalate privileges. In our case, we don't have to escalate any privileges because we have the highest privileges on the machine. We can create other type of, we can create backdoors. So what I typically like to do is sometimes I might create another user somewhere that I can log into. So if this, if I got caught, or if I can create a legitimate user, so I can then remote into it using remote desktop if it's a Windows machine. Or you can do things like steal password hashes or loot any type of information. So again, looting information is good for CTFs, bad for real life. You don't want to loot in real life. Again, you just want to show that you have access to the files and photos, but you do not want to transfer files and photos from a target to your machine. And then typically, like I said, you want to do more enumeration, because sometimes you might get access to a machine and you don't have root privileges, and you need to gain access to another machine in order to get root privileges. So what we're going to do though is we're going to steal some password hashes, and then we're going to crack the password offline. So when I say crack the password offline is we're going to take the password hashes off of this machine, move it over to our machine because we have permission to do so. And then we're going to use a tool called John the Ripper. And John the Ripper is a open source password cracking tool, and is typically designed, you can use it to test and analyze the strength of your password. So again, going back to the example I use with my neighbors, I tell them to tell me, or whatever the password may be, we go through the whole process of creating a password, and then I show them how weak the password is. And then that's usually an eye opener for them, because typically that password is also being used on everything. So their bank password is their social media password, is their login to their work machine password. So now when you say, hey, look, I just cracked your password in less than 10 seconds, now they're like, oh crap, I use that password for everything. So again, that's one way you can use it. And then for pen testing, like I said, we use it when we're stealing password hashes to then try to gain access to machines or elevate our privileges. So when you look for password hashes, you look in two different places. So in Windows, you want to look for the security account manager or the SAM database. That's a file that's in the hidden system root folder. So system root system32 config folder or directory. And the SAM database contains the encrypted password hashes for the local user accounts on the system. Any type of domain account, the password hashes are stored in the Active Directory database on the domain controller. And then for Linux, you want to look in the Etsy password file. So the Etsy password contains the account information, and the Etsy shadow file contains the encrypted password hashes. So you have to so when you're stealing Linux passwords, you have to use both. You have to get the account information and the password hashes from each folder. So once you do that, you combine the two, and then you use a command called unshadow, which will then merge the two files and then extract the username and password hash information into a single file. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So we're going to do this unshadow. We're going to run this command here. So unshadow Etsy password, Etsy shadow crack password. Now we're not going to remember, we're not going to do it on the target machine. Again, we're simulating a pen test. So we're going to take the hashes, move it over to our machine, and then crack that file. So what we'll end up doing is we'll grab the password hashes from the target machine we just exploited and crack them using John the Ripper. 447. Okay, let's go. So now we're here. So we're going to go, we're going to cat Etsy password, and we are going to take this information and we are going to just right click and hit copy. And then we are going to, I need to move this stuff from Zoom. Okay. And then we're just going to minimize this. Actually, I'm not even going to do that. We're just going to right click, whatever. We're going to split it horizontally. We're going to CD into the desktop. And then I am going to use a tool called Vim. Password. And then we're going to hit I, right click and hit paste. Now, if I had to break down Vim and all of that, we probably would go over time. It's a joke. The running joke in cybersecurity is not knowing how to exit out of Vim. Oh, we can't clear out of that. So now we need to do cat, and then we're going to go Etsy shadow. And now that gives us the password hashes. And we're going to right click, and then we're going to go back and we're going to hit Vim. We're just going to call this shadow. And then we're going to hit I for insert, right click, and then we're going to paste the selection, and then we're going to hit escape, colon, and then we're going to say right and then quit. Okay, so now we clear that. We're going to collapse this terminal. And now we should have, if we hit LS, we should have two files called password and shadow. So now going back to what we did before, we're going to run this command. So unshadow, well, we don't have to worry about Etsy because we pulled it. So now we're going to hit unshadow password shadow, and then we're going to make a file called crackpw.txt. So we're going to hit sudo because we want to do it as a super user. And then we're going to say unshadow password shadow into crackpw.txt. Cali. Okay, so now it also created a directory for John, for John the Ripper. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to see if we can do it without the word list. Just because I just wanted to hurry up. So we're going to hit John. Say rules. Oh, okay, hold on. Let's do this. So we just ran John with no word list, no nothing, and using the shadow and at the password and shadow file, it did find one password hash. And if you look, it found the user Marlin Spike and the password was Marlin Spike. So now we have successfully cracked a user's password. So now if we wanted, we could then gain access into Marlin Spike's account. And we got a few more minutes, so we'll do just that. But I just wanted to kind of go through real quick. So phase 5 would be the report writing and delivery. So in the final phase, this is where you're collecting the results of the pen test to write a detailed report. It contains the executive summary. So this is where I talked about earlier, where you're breaking down for the executives, description of the vulnerabilities of what was discovered, if they were exploited and how they were exploited, the potential impact of the vulnerabilities, and the recommendations for mitigating them. The report aims to provide actionable insights to the organization and enable them to address the vulnerabilities. So what I wanted to do earlier was I actually had a template report that I had written and I wanted to share it, but the file got corrupted and I wasn't able to transfer it. So my apologies, but hopefully if you guys follow me on social media or stuff like that, at some point I will have a report template for you. So so next steps. So now the next questions are, do you think were there any other ways to exploit this target? So real quick, show of hands, do you think there's more than one way to gain access to this machine? Yes, no, maybe, probably. Okay. Likely. Okay, so can we use the crack password anywhere else? Are there any other vulnerable services? When we were doing the recon, was there anything interesting? And can we exploit without Metasploit? The answer to all of those is yes. So we got a couple minutes, so I'm gonna see if I can, I'm gonna see what I can do. So let's bring back up our machine. Okay, so we're gonna go, so since we know we have the password of Marlin Spike and we know SSH is available, let's go ahead and let's SSH into it. So we're gonna go SSH into 192.168.10.5. Sure. Yes. Oh, hold on. Yes. And then, oh, I didn't, I forgot. Me back out of it. I have to do SSH Marlin Spike at, right? And then it's going to ask for Marlin Spike's password, which was Marlin Spike. And now we are logged into the machine as the user Marlin Spike. So if we hit LS, you'll see there's a couple files here. There's desktop. So if let's see if we CD into the desktop, if there's anything in there, there is not. So we hit CD back to go back one directory. And then let's see if we go into documents. Is there anything in the documents? There's nothing there either. So it doesn't look like we have anything useful there. So typically what you want to do is you want to see what type of rights this user may have. So you do that by typing in sudo -l. And if it asks for the password, we already know it to be Marlin Spike. So we go Marlin Spike. So now we're looking to see what Marlin Spike can do. And it looks like this may have been misconfigured because now it looks like it says they can do everything. So if that is the case, then what you want to do, this is a big misconfiguration in Linux. So if that's the case, it can run any command and it can run it like sudo or like a super user. So let's just give it, let's say sudo bash. And then if we run sudo bash, you'll see the $ turned into the hashtag, and we are now root. And just in case you want to check, you just type in who am I, and now you have root. Okay, so let's see if we can do one more. So we're gonna exit out of here, out of this. Oh, stop it, CD. Exit. Thank you. So now let's see if we can gain access to another thing here. Going back to the web application. And then it was secret. Oh, I can't type. Come on. All right, so now if we skip the content. Okay, so we see that this is a WordPress page. So if we hit login. No, okay, so what if we do secret admin? No, okay, that didn't work. So how about secret WP admin? Okay. The VM doesn't want to work with me, y'all. It's weird. Okay. Well, we know secret exists and we have 2 minutes. So what if we do, since we know it is WordPress, let's see if we can do, okay, so we do have a thing called WPS scan, which is a WordPress scanner. And now we'll do 192.168.10.5. And then we'll say secret. And then we'll enumerate. We want it to enumerate users. We're going to run out of time. I think we're going to run out of time. So, spoiler alert. So basically there's a vulnerability in the WordPress site that would allow you to gain access to WordPress. So first you have to figure out where the WordPress login page is. And then once you figure out the WordPress login page, you can brute force it. I just realized I did this without my camera the whole time. Sorry, y'all. I never turned my camera back on. Okay, so basically the WordPress one is you log in, you have to figure out the username, which there's a vulnerability that allows you to that WordPress would tell you that the username may have been correct, but the password was incorrect. So you have to try to figure out how to crack the password. Once you gain access to the WordPress, there is a vulnerable plugin. And from that vulnerable plugin, you can upload an exploit into the plugin and gain access into the system. And then you'd have to elevate your privileges using another privilege escalation exploit. So we are at 5 o'clock. So for more information, I do have a blog post with the walkthrough on alphacybersecurity.tech. I know we're a little bit over, but if there's any questions, you could just throw them in the chat, or if you could turn on a mic or anything like that, I can answer the questions. If there's any other resources, for other resources, you can go to vulnhub.com. That's where you can basically build your own lab. Then you can do Try Hack Me. Try Hack Me kind of does a CTF style, but it also does things where it helps you. Haiku, Hack the Box, Pen Tester Lab, Portswigger Web Security Academy if you're into web app pen testing. OWASP Juice Shop is another one for web applications. And then shameless plug, alphacybersecurity.tech. And if you want to find me, you can find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Davin-Jackson on LinkedIn, djax_alpha on YouTube, on Twitter and Instagram, and Alpha Cybersecurity on YouTube. So that's the class. Sorry, I didn't kind of get through everything. We had to move through it a little fast, but I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, just find me online and I will be happy to walk through it, and maybe we can do another screen sharing session at some point. Thank you for everything. Again, if there's any questions, I will be in the lobby or in any of the chats. And again, thank you to the Women's Society of Cyber Jutsu for having this event and inviting me here. I hope I didn't bore you guys too much, and have a good day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.